we can probably start.
Hi, in case anyone already joined.
Exactly. Hi from our side. Yeah, I mean, and welcome to the first SDV Coffee Talk with Moritz and me. Yeah.
Be patient. We're still figuring out the tech for first instance. We don't know whether anyone's online yet. So if you want to post a comment, that's what we can see. Perfect.
Cool.
Hi, Joel.
Very nice.
Okay, good to know that it's working.
At least, yeah. I mean, after struggling a little bit, we know it works. Cool. Should we probably start? I mean, at the moment, people join still. Okay. Okay, then welcome to our first software-defined vehicle coffee chat with Moritz and me. Yeah, I mean, what was the idea here? Actually, I mean, I met Moritz, I think, a month ago or so on an AWS summit in person, and we had a very nice chat. And after then, I think a couple of days after this chat, I was just asking him if he would be interested in such a coffee talk about SDV, and he was, he was ready to join and have a nice chat, and we just organized it. Yeah, probably we can just start. Moritz, welcome. Probably you can just introduce yourself a little bit. What do you do? And yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Fadi. Yeah, it was really nice seeing you at the AWS Summit. So I'm Moritz. I'm working at Electrobit. I'm responsible for SDV product management, and I'm actually fairly passionate about the topic. So I've been writing quite a bit about it here on LinkedIn as well. And it's really cool because actually, this is how Fadi and I got into contact. So we never met in person before, and then just ran into each other at the AWS Summit. And I thought it was an awesome thing because I felt that suddenly, like a social media community thing actually turns into reality. So I thought it was really cool to actually get the physical connect and set something up together here.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, we met on AWS Summit, actually. I mean, how was it for you? I mean, the event itself. I mean,
I think AWS Summit was pretty cool because it has a completely different vibe than most automotive conferences. And I think for me, this is really where SDV, software world, and automotive suddenly connect. I mean, when you look through the AWS event, I mean, come on, they put a Ferris wheel in the courtyard, right? How cool is that? But aside from that, it's really about cloud, about AI, about modern development technologies. And at the same time, you have that automotive stage where you see how the practices of IT world and of automotive are suddenly coming together. So I thought it was a pretty cool event also for everyone who is on automotive events a lot, but not so much these events, to actually get the connect to other industries. So this was, for me, really a cool experience. I like that a lot.
Okay. But have you been ever before in AWS summits at all? I mean, was it the first time? Or?
No, I haven't. It was first time for me, and
okay.
I thought it was really cool.
I mean, I was also surprised about this automotive stage, actually. I didn't expect this, that so many things happen in automotive actually on AWS. I mean, with BMW, Mercedes was there, and Stellantis and a lot of other OEMs were there, and giving also talks about very vehicle related topics. Also, SDV was a big topic there. Yeah, I was also very surprised, actually. I mean, very positively surprised about this. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, just for the audience, if you have any questions, any comments, you should just write it in the comments, and we can just discuss about about the question, feel free to write it in the comments. Yeah. Yeah, what do you think about actually at all software-defined vehicle? I mean, this is. I mean, when I got to know about this topic was, I think, 2 years ago, also, or something like that, in 2022 or so, when this Eclipse software-defined vehicle working group was founded. And I read about this on LinkedIn, and I was quite interested in this topic. But then later I learned this topic is more older. I mean, this is existing for a longer time, but I was not aware about that. And first time I read about this on Eclipse Foundation, and yeah, my interest started, and I read a lot of things about that. And yeah, what do you think? I mean, is this SDV actually a new buzzword, or is it some new revolution in automotive? I mean, what do you think actually? I mean,
I would say it's a buzzword for revolution automotive. Completely overhyped right now, still a bit. So when I look at, I mean, I have the same kind of experience as you, right? Looking at how the discussion has evolved. So I started getting involved like 2 to 3 years ago. And initially, it was just a blur. I mean, what's a software-defined vehicle? What is an automotive OS? What needs to change? Is it, are we all going to die? Is automotive industry doomed? These kind of things, right? And I think, especially over the last year, the entire discussion has matured a lot. So these days, you don't really need to talk too much about what the value proposition of an SDV is. That it's not just about adding OTA capabilities to your software and you're done, but that it actually looks at supply chain and business models, at technical architecture, about development workflow. So it's really a transformation of how we do software rather than just adding a feature into an ECU, right? So from that regard, the discussion, the terminology, in my opinion, has matured quite a bit. When I look at delivery, I think we still see a lot of POCs, not a lot of production. I think really we have crossed the peak of the hype cycle. Probably still on our way down. And for me, the important point now is really to get first tangible proof points. I mean, really, what's the development practices that we see in practice for projects or platforms today? Are we still calculating based on business models based on bill of materials, or rather taking a total cost of ownership based approach for software, looking at software as a business case of its own, these kind of things? And this is where practice and ambition are still light years apart from each other, I would say.
But I mean, you have seen the presentations on the summit. I mean, on the AWS summit. I mean, does this? I mean, as far as you can see from the presentation, does it go in the right direction? Actually, the OEMs.
Yeah.
I mean,
what they showed there with especially with that virtual Android development connected to the cloud and actually doing the validation in a virtual setup rather than always needing a physical vehicle to test this. This is for me one of those lighthouse projects where you actually see these things in action. And then when I look at how companies deploy these things at scale or not, this is where I think we now see some of these lighthouse projects and now incremental improvement. I mean, what's your experience? I mean, you're also working at an OEM, so
yeah. I mean, it's for me quite. I mean, my view is quite biased because I work for certain OEM. Yeah, it's quite difficult, I think, because this legacy from the past and transformation to a new organization is quite challenging as far as I see, and very costly and very challenging. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have this view from outside to see, like you. I mean, you work with different OEMs. Probably you have a more wider view on the topic, but it's quite difficult. I think it's not so easy. There is one question actually in the chat. Probably we can just go through. There is one user asks, how do you see the challenges of cybersecurity constraints with respect to SDV-based automotive products? Please share your insights.
That's going to be one of the big things. I mean, we all know about the new UNEC R155 regulation. It mandates to perform cybersecurity maintenance for 10 years after end of production. And now when we assume, like, let's say, well, 5 years, including development time for a vehicle, give or take. So we're talking about roughly 15 years of maintenance. And so far, maintenance has always been like this little side thought, like, do we really need to take care of it? Will we really need to fix the bug or not? And so people didn't really want to touch it too much, and it's like a cost adder after the bill of material. Now, if you look at the SDV value proposition, being able to deploy new functionality into existing vehicles, this means it's an essential part of your strategy to perform updates. So every vehicle, every SDV is, by its very definition, connected. You do have the obligation to provide cybersecurity maintenance with this regulation. So you will see a lot of versions and variants of cars, and you will see them for longer periods of time. And now when you look at 15 years, you need to take a total cost of ownership calculation. What's your cost to do that maintenance? And it cannot be an afterthought. So you need to bake cybersecurity in. And you see this today. I mean, there's now the first OEMs that take vehicles out of their portfolio because they are unable to retrofit the UNEC compliance. So literally vehicles that are still asked for on the market are being pulled off the market just for cybersecurity regulation. So it's a big thing. And you have to think about cybersecurity maintenance across the entire life cycle of a vehicle. And when you now take these 15 years, Swati, you're a technical guy. Take your guess. How old is Docker?
I think 10 years or so, or 12, probably.
12 to 13 years.
Okay.
The iPhone was a year old 15 years ago. The original iPhone. So that just to illustrate how big the problem really is. So we would be talking about still roughly maintaining the first iPhone.
But cybersecurity, I think this is quite challenging. I mean, because you have millions of cars on the road. I mean, they are in different conditions. Different environments, different networks. I mean, you have to be very careful. You have different regulations in different countries, even. I mean, I think this is a very challenging topic to cover all cybersecurity all over the world. I mean, you don't have just one market. I mean, yes. So many markets and so many different requirements. I think this is quite challenging, in my opinion.
And when you look at the supply chain, I mean, so far when we look at, let's call them hardware-defined vehicles, where you do an integration based on ECUs, like plugging hardware together, and as an OEM, you're not in control about the software that actually goes into your vehicle. And you now produce millions of different variants because you have so many configuration options. How are you going to manage that complexity? What do you really know which kind of, libraries are used in which kind of ECU and whether you're affected by a security vulnerability or not? And this is one of the aspects where I think reduction of variants, especially of software variants, is absolutely essential to make the entire process of cybersecurity maintenance or of updatability in general manageable.
I mean, I think, for example, if you consider all open source libraries which are used, I mean, and potentially every library you use could have some security issues. And I mean, Log4j, for example, I mean, this is a very popular example. Log4j was used in millions of servers, probably, you know, where Java applications are used. And then one day, security issue came out, and then everything has had to be updated. I just imagine the same situation on a vehicle. I mean, you know, there is some library has some security issue, and you have millions on the road, in which are probably not always connected. You know, I mean, because of the network and conditions and different. How do you deal with that? This is quite, I mean, quite challenging to ensure that you roll out the security update for all cars. I mean, despite where they are, you know, they can be in the mountains, I don't know, whatever. This is quite challenging, I think, this concept of security. It's still, for me personally, not so clear how this should be tackled. I mean, because it would be also costly, quite costly, such thing.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we do now have the software bill of materials, right? That hopefully now everyone should be sticking to, so that at least in theory everyone knows what they put in their vehicles. So it still is just an inventory of things. You still don't know whether you're affected by a vulnerability that's detected or not, whether it could be exploited in a system context, but it's at least a start for it. So I think some of the processes are now getting into place. I think the requirements are very worthwhile to actually having been defined now. Question really is how to manage these things efficiently.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, let's go to there are a couple of questions. Probably we can just go quickly there. There is a second question. Does SDV concept suppose having any hardware device, sensors, actuators installed in advance for the further usage by any new software application, or does SDV consider the possibility to add a new function for already existing hardware devices which should already have been used by any basic logic?
Yeah, the way I read this question, it's actually the one about the rollout stages of SDV capabilities. There was a very interesting report by S&P Global Mobility, and Richard Dixon talked about this at the Automotive Compute Conference in Frankfurt last year. Evolution of the different EE architecture, about consolidation of ECUs, and one thing that really struck me was the 2012 Tesla Model S had 70 ECUs, 70. The current Model 3 is down to 16. So what you do is you start reducing your EE architecture as much as possible, because it's so much easier to update one bigger ECU rather than a distributed system, right? No one wants to do that really. And now you can ask, okay, can I centralize my update capabilities in the first rollout to those bigger high performance controllers, for instance, or zonal controllers, and leave the periphery as it is, so that you first of all start reducing the scope of what you really want to touch. I mean, do you really want to update a washer wiper in the future? I'm not so sure. But wait, perhaps you want to have a controller that sits on an HPC that has some fancy feature for washer wiper that I personally could never think of. I don't know, but you would want to separate these aspects. What is interesting about this part is, again, when you look at things like the UNIC with 15 years. What happens if the crypto accelerators in your hardware can't support the new Cypher suites and the older ones that are supported by the hardware are outdated? Do we really, I mean, for these time frames, do we need upgradable hardware or not? There's some interesting concepts that are actually in the market today. For instance, for retrofitting Android capabilities into existing HMIs, like plug-in devices, where you can really retrofit Android app installations in existing HMIs. And this is something that, from a hardware perspective, could be attractive in the future to add compute capabilities. But it's always the question about how stable are the APIs, how stable are the interfaces, whether you can actually make this work, right? When I remember, I mean, I was a gamer kid when I was going to school, right? I played all the 3D shooters and so on, and I always thought, well, let's spend a bit more on the newest mainboard because I could upgrade the processor or the graphics card later on to get that little bit of extra performance. It never happened. By the time I was ready to upgrade, that mainboard was outdated again. So this is a big question, whether hardware updates are actually going to happen. There are these concepts for blade architecture and these kind of things. And let's see, it's reading the crystal ball these days, I would say.
But I think at the moment, as far as I see, at least, the ECUs are planned very tightly. You know, the capacity of the ECU is very tightly, compute power is very tightly planned because of costs and so on to save. But I think for SDV, at least, in my opinion, the planning must be more generous. You know, yes. I mean, not so tight, because otherwise if you want to keep the updatability for 10, 15 years of your vehicle, then you need also to plan the hardware in a way that this will be able to updatable in 10 to 15 years. You know, I mean,
and the point really is, it's not only about the hardware, it's about how you calculate your business cases. So when I look at an SDV, and the value proposition is, I want to bring new functions, really not just updates or bug fixes, but actually things that increase the value of your car. What do you need for it? First of all, you need to separate the life cycles of hardware and software. So if introducing new software features means changing the hardware, then it's by definition not software defined. The second point is you need to be willing to actually supply new software values or actual new software functions to vehicles that you've already sold. That requires a certain development process. And the third point is the investment into the second, you're not going to be able to make without having a monetization scheme for it. And there's like a bunch of different monetization schemes that we see out there today. I mean, there's the topic about selling functions post sale of the vehicle. There's this monetization on data. There's a bunch of different models that we see. The point with this is really you cannot separate these three. So when you only take 2 out of 3, you're going to fail with the SDV deployment. When I now look at hardware over allocation, it really directly goes into separating life cycles. And you need to be able to decouple the life cycles of hardware and software. So it's never going to work without it. So I was actually kind of impressed when Magnus Esberg actually last year at the MBOS strategy update announced that you guys would be putting a fingerprint sensor in each and every car. And the first thought I had was, well, why would you do that? And the easy thought is, well, yeah, payment, like, okay, pay parking tickets, but that's boring. The cool thing is, well, what happened if you opened up that SDK and someone came to the idea, I'm going to roll out a function that now lets me restrict the speed that my kids drive on the Autobahn. A function that is not, that you would typically not really associate with the fingerprint sensor, but that makes really sense to use that sensor. So this is really the point, not only compute or memory, so also over allocation of sensors, like about perception, can actually enable such features. When I think about smartphones, I was blown away back then by the first version of Shazam, that music recognition software. It's a thing I would have personally never thought about that use case. Using the microphone of a smartphone. And when you now take the very same idea and put it to automotive. So Shazam, could that have happened for a Nokia phone? No, it couldn't, because Nokia wouldn't have had any business model to actually monetize on that function. And this is now the point that in the SDV scope automotive hasn't reached at all. We don't have open SDKs. We don't have like functions that can be developed by third parties and then vetted for installation so that you can actually deploy to vehicle. That's what's completely missing. We're still talking about efficiency in development, being able to update in the first place. So we have by far not reached that Shazam moment right now.
Okay. There are a couple of more questions. I mean, there is one comment more. I think SDV is more than just a software topic. It should cover organizational aspect and other design area, mechanical, electronics. From this perspective, simulation tools, virtual verification, validation, MBSE tools are key. Maybe we should talk more about function-defined vehicle instead of SDV. Okay, interesting.
So I particularly like 2 points. First of all, organizational aspect, because in order to make a software-defined vehicle work, you need to decouple those life cycles, and you need to decouple the monetization schemes. That means you cannot calculate the business cases of your ECUs based on bill of materials, because then you start optimizing for hardware costs. It doesn't make sense. So it's a change that you need to do for business ownership, especially on OEM side. And this is something that is very rarely seen these days still. And the other part that I find particularly interesting about this question is, okay, how do we develop simulation tools? How do we do development? Do we do it on specification, or do we do it in open source? If we do it on open source, what's the development model? Are we still going to require ASPICE? And if so, how do we do design and requirements tracing and HIS metrics and all these kind of things? And really, if you start developing a platform, these things need to change. So I think developer experiences to really get to that speed to market is absolutely essential in that field.
Okay. But the function-defined vehicle is also an interesting concept, in my opinion. I mean, it's more focused on the function. You know, it's not on the software. It's more on the functionality. So it's interesting term. I mean,
yeah, I'm not so happy about the term function-defined. Sounds so much like a feature phone, right?
Yes.
Yeah. When I compare the original,
but at the moment, I mean, if you look on the cars, I mean, it's very function defined, you know. I mean,
yeah. And when I look at the original iPhone and the Nokias and Blackberries at the time, they roughly had feature parity. I mean, you had a calendar, you had contacts, you had an internet browser. Yes, the experience of it was a bit, well, let's say, lackluster. But anyhow, it was all there. For me, the critical feature of the iPhone was creating an SDK, opening it up for third-party developers, and creating an app store.
Yeah, this was the game changer. This was the game changer, definitely.
Because it enabled innovation of third parties that can have different business models than the handset manufacturers. And that's really the point that we haven't reached at all. And also where these ambitions of a lot of OEMs right now to try to control everything, to try to control the entire ecosystem, is not really helping.
Okay.
I mean, we haven't seen an open SDK of any OEM these days yet, right? And I currently count 15 different software platforms in the industry, which is just insane.
Yeah. Okay, there is another question. Can we say that Ethernet is going to play a crucial role in the overall SDV communication stack? Or can we say that an Ethernet is going to be a backbone of SDV?
I would have thought that these two questions are the same thing. So Ethernet is there and it's made. Ethernet is there in the vehicle and it's made to stay. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, if you consider especially autonomous driving, I mean the data amount of data which is coming out of the sensors and all the. I mean, you cannot cover this with another technology. I think. I mean, Ethernet is the only possibility, I guess, and I think it will be some kind of a backbone of SDV. I mean,
and I think it's really important also from the fact that we see with the SDV convergence of technologies. I mean, we now get all the cloud connectivity. We get all those use cases for building data pipelines from the vehicle into the cloud and back to data pipeline analytics on these things and so on. So there's going to be more adoption of technologies, well, mostly from IT into automotive, not so much the other way around, very likely. So getting more compatibility helps. Getting more reuse, especially of open source solutions out of the IT world, helps a lot. I mean, right now, when I look at, well, do you want to develop an AI inference library specifically for automotive? I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
I'd rather like to see this taken from IT world. I mean, this is exactly the kind of vibe that you get at the AWS Summit, right?
Yes.
Can we really get that that convergence of technologies? Can we bridge that gap? I mean, when I started my career in automotive,
reusability. Yeah.
When I started my career in automotive, it was always said, and it's still somewhat-ish true, automotive adopts technology 10 years after it's been starting to get used in IT. And when we look at containers, for instance, well, still kind of holds, right?
It's something like that.
I mean, give or take. And I think this gap is rapidly closing with SDV.
Okay.
And it needs to close, because otherwise we won't keep the pace of innovation. If you now have the expectation that you can install TikTok on your cockpits or infotainment system, well, you got to keep pace with it, right?
Yeah. So there is SDV data already being used as a revenue stream? Are OEMs aggregating vehicle data with user consent, I hope, and selling it to third parties like insurance companies already?
Yes, a lot of OEMs do claim to have that. I mean, it's funny when you look at data APIs. Go to developer.pasteyourOEMname.com, and pretty much every major OEM is a hit. So it exists for GM, it exists for Volvo cars, it exists for Mercedes, right? So yes, there is data products for vehicles. Funnily enough, everyone has a proprietary API for it. So there's little standardization done yet. COVESA is doing a good step into that direction with VSS. And then on the not so ethical part, I mean, we've all seen the news out of the US, I think it was 1 or 2 months ago, where apparently some OEMs sold data to insurance companies without the user's knowledge.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes, it was a pretty big thing. So apparently there's business models to sell data. I really hope that we get to a point of ethical data use. And this is where I think, well, a lot of people keep on complaining about EU being first on regulation. I personally do very much like the GDPR. And I think this is one of the essential parts. And we also see in the US right now that the regulations, they're trying to keep pace with that to actually get more privacy regulation. Yes, for some business cases, it's a hindrance, but I think it's a good hindrance.
But I think this is also very depending on the market, you know. I mean, if you're, for example, in China, probably the data regulation is completely different. But your vehicle and your software has to also, or your backend has to deal also with that. I mean, that you're probably not so strong with the data protection, or, you know, I mean, like in Europe. And so I think it's quite difficult. I mean, this data handling, I'm not sure how the OEMs will deal with that, but I think depending on the market, there will be, I'm pretty sure there's some business models which will be used, I guess. I mean, there is a further question. Would initiatives like COVESA helping to reach that Shazam moment, what you talked before? I mean, what do you think about that?
I really do like COVESA. So I actually attended the all members meeting in Gothenburg last month, I think it was. And I love the way that what the type of community that comes together. So when I look through the attendance of OEMs, it's rather good. A lot of OEMs, a lot of trucking companies, which I think is really cool. And then a lot of startups that are making their attempt to enter automotive. A lot of these startups don't have specifically automotive background are now trying to enter that field. And for me, the most interesting point out of COVESA right now is VSS, the vehicle signal specification, because it puts a semantic definition on vehicle signals. And this would be one of the game changers, really. So right now, when you want to develop, let's say, an application for fleet management for vehicles, and let's say you get some IP access, what are you going to do? In case of doubt, you get some byte array, you need to left shift by 2 bytes, truncate 3 bits, and then you get the speed of the vehicle in meters per second or something like that. But you never know. So in the end, you always need to adapt any kind of application that you do to a specific vehicle generation and to a specific OEM. And that's really the point. So if you now are one of those startups and you want to deploy, create a function that you could roll out to each and every one of those vehicles, what are you going to do? You're going to drown in porting efforts. And this is also the point where all those proprietary automotive OS platforms are so hurtful, because there's nothing that even comes close to an agreement on a controlled API set or something that you could build upon. And COVESA is making steps in exactly these kind of directions. This is what I really like about it. Where I think COVESA, as well as, for instance, Eclipse SDV, really struggle is it's developed in open source, which I love, but the question remains, how do you get the open source project into production? Because in the end, someone's going to come around with requirements on ASPICE processes, on HIS metrics, potentially on safety, certainly on cybersecurity, on liability, all these kind of things. And none of the artifacts that you need to create to achieve these certifications are part of the open source projects. That means if anyone actually wants to put this into production, they would need to retrofit this. And I don't see very substantial efforts really to make this happen right now. And for me, this is really the deciding point whether the initiatives there are going to be successful. And again, VSS is a good example where it can be, because it doesn't specify the API, but just a data format.
But are you aware about if this VSS is used by any OEM also? I mean, I'm just curious. Probably you
yes,
know from your collaborations with different. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I know this specification. I read this specification. It's really good. I mean, I would also I think this is a good way to go. Having a unified API, so to say, vehicle API. I think this is also how it should go in future. But I'm not aware if this or all these initiatives. I mean, COVESA or other industry like Sophie. I mean, all these initiatives exist. I'm not really sure how much these initiatives are really having any effect on the existing OEMs in Germany at all. I don't know. I mean, this is not so clear to me, actually. I mean, I know they exist, but the effect is not clear to me. I mean, how much they can really influence, because still in this industry, I think a lot of things are very proprietary still. I mean, very, and it's not so standardized. I mean, if you look, for example, on hardware, ECU hardware, every OEM has a different hardware. It's developed from scratch every time. I mean, there is no standard hardware actually.
But if you look at some of the more attractive use cases of an SDV, so when we look at professionally managed fleets, where you would have a huge cost lever to actually motivate the invest into update capabilities, where you say, well, now the downtime of my vehicle is going to be reduced by, let's say, I don't know, 10 or 5% because I have predictive maintenance, and when the truck drives into the shop, the replacement parts are already there. If you are a company that is in that space, right now, unfortunately, those markets are still dominated by bolt-on devices. A lot of times they have devices that you need to plug into your OBD port or anywhere in the vehicle or attached to your TCU to scrape the data. A lot of times you really need to reverse engineer the data format if it's not public knowledge to then see what you can make out of it. And it's just pure insanity. If you really want to build a scalable business, that cannot work. And really, how many bolt-on devices do you want to have in your vehicle, right? So if I'm now a professional fleet operator and I say, well, I have these 5 services that I want to use, and everyone says, well, and you need to plug my device into an OBD port, not really the best of solutions.
Definitely not. No, I mean, this is definitely not the best solution. But I mean, yeah, I'm really curious about the long-term effects of these initiatives. I was talking to Sophie, I mean, also with AWS, because AWS is also, I mean, one of the members. I talked also to ARM. I mean, I like these initiatives, but it's still not so clear to me how much these initiatives can influence the existing solutions. I don't know if probably I mean, all the COEMs, for example, from China, all the new OEMs, I mean, they are, I don't know, no legacy. They were built in the last 10 or 20 years, like Tesla, like BYD, and all these new car manufacturers. I think they don't have any legacy. Do you know probably if they really adapt best practices from such initiatives? Do you know something, for example, from COVESA or so, if they use it, or is it also something they develop by their own?
So there is separate initiatives in China as well. So when you look at things like MIH, for instance, or there's another SDV alliance there. But also, I don't really see the big scale adoption of those solutions in specifically in the Chinese market these days. But what we do see definitely is software architectures that deviate from established paths sometimes. And sometimes it's simply possibly because regulations are a different thing. In some parts, you have to say, well, if you don't need to have so much legacy connections that you cannot easily drop, well, then things become a bit easier, right? If you have fewer vehicle types, if you reduce your hardware variants, things become easier, a lot easier. If you don't need to have I don't know, like 4 different brands with slightly different value proposition, and everyone wants to differentiate a bit, but not too much because they want to compart. These are all the topics about variant handling and being able to standardize things also internally. And this is really what makes a software platform development easier. When you look at version management, for instance, from the iPhone. iPhone 6s is pretty cool. There's a chart from Statista on how long specific iPhone models have received iOS updates. iPhone 6s in total had 7 different versions of iOS. Received an upgrade of the software platform every year. And then the iOS versions were deprecated after 2 or 3 years typically. So what Apple did there was specifically look at deprecation of software platform versions to reduce the number of variants that you need to maintain over time. Well, if you don't have history, if you don't have too many different variants, that helps. Now, instead, if you just keep on adding variants of the software platform over time and don't really want to deprecate things or say, well, we're not going to touch this, then you're going to be eaten up by your maintenance efforts in the long run. So if you now start introducing, like if you take a BOS, if you have version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5, and the first version is deprecated after 15 years, well, that would mean you got to maintain 15 different versions of MBOS over the lifetime. It doesn't make any sense at all. So really looking at API compatibility, at deprecating versions, at portability, backwards compatibility, this is extremely important to make this work and to establish an ecosystem. You can also put it the other way around. If you imagine Apple released the next iPhone and it was the best hardware device in the world. And they said, well, yeah, you can get it, but you won't have access to the App Store. We're going to release App Store 2.0, and it's going to start empty. Everyone needs to start porting their apps. I'm not convinced at all that that device would be a success. And this is really the situation that we still have for a lot of OEMs these days.
Yeah, I think this is quite. I mean, this is also the challenge, I think, for the OEMs to overcome all these problems actually. And I don't know. I mean, this will be very painful. I mean, in my opinion, this overcoming will be very painful. Let's see how it will be. I think we are at the end of our time. I mean, it was scheduled until 15 after past 9. Thanks for your time, Moritz. I mean, also
thank you for the invitation.
Questions. Yeah, I mean, just for our audience, I mean, we talked before we started for the live stream. It was Moritz. I mean, I think we will do this coffee talk once a month and also have some guests in the future. Yeah, stay tuned and see you in the next one.
And Moritz, please leave a lot of comments, questions. I really want to hear what you think about the format, whether we got to overhaul the entire thing, do it differently or not. Upfront posted questions. Let us just know your thoughts on whether it was worthwhile or not. Also for us, it was the first try, and we're eager to learn or ditch it if it doesn't make sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatih. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.